Hello, welcome back to the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm Andrew Musgrove, joined by John Gibson, and today we're going to talk about Dan Burn and the future of Newcastle United centre back / left back. What does the long term future hold for him in what is a very important year for him? Of course, the World Cup is on the horizon. John, lots to talk about when it comes to Big Dan Burn, but first and foremost, how are you keeping? Are you well?
Not really. Not the way Newcastle are doing at the moment. I'm getting dizzy on the swing, going backwards and forwards. But we'll survive it all, and we've got a fortnight to stew, and then back we come with a dead easy game against Man City.
Easy, yeah, to say the least. Like I say, we're going to talk about the long-term future of Dan Burn. 33 years of age, contract expires in the summer of 2027. He's really been one of Eddie Howe's key players in recent years. Most recently, in recent weeks, he's been at left back, and that, of course, has not gone quite to plan. And that is why we are now talking about his future in the team, in the starting 11, and whether he has a place in it. I think where I want to start before we get into it, because it's likely going to be negative, if we're going to be honest, because he hasn't really performed very well at all in recent games. I want to start by looking at him overall and what we think of him when we look back at his Newcastle United career since he joined from Brighton. For me, he is a Newcastle United legend. He will be spoken in the same breath as the likes of Bobby Moncur, for example, because although he wasn't wearing the captain's armband against Liverpool in that Carabao Cup final, he was one of the leaders on the pitch and, of course, got that all-important first goal. He has been an example, I think, to everybody. He's lived the Geordie dream. You know, he supported the club as a boy, got rejected as a young lad, worked his way up the league system to finally play for Newcastle United, not only in a final, but the Champions League as well, and scoring just recently one of the most unbelievable headers we are likely to see ever watching Newcastle United. I think if you're a young coach, John, and you're teaching kids every other weekday sort of thing, you will hold Dan Burn up as an example of someone who can get to the very top when maybe things are against him. And if you put your heart and soul into it, then there's always a route to somewhere glorious. Your thoughts on Dan Burn in general before we do talk about him as a left back?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I reiterate what you said already, Andrew. He's one of the great success stories of Newcastle United. He's literally lived the dream, as he's said himself. And it is a wonderful dream because he was this big lad, as we all know, the famous pushing the trolleys round Asda, and then he ends up playing for Blythe Town and Blythe Spartans, and ends up playing for Newcastle United, scoring the crucial goal at Wembley and getting capped by England. I mean, earlier this year was a fairy tale for Dan Burn with that wonderful header that really won us the League Cup. I would think it's fair to say that we know that Isaac scored a second and then they pulled one back. But the thing we remember as a thing of beauty was Dan Burn's header at Wembley, which he repeated just recently in a league game at St James's, of course. But within a week of playing at Wembley, he was in England international, and everything in his garden was roses, and rightly so. And he is a wonderful story because he's a good guy as well. He's a Geordie guy doing it for his local club, and his attitude is immense. His attitude to football and to overcome problems and to make the most of the talent he's got is absolutely huge. And he's done all those things. And he's rightly got his place in Geordie history, whatever happens from now on. But let's emphasise his career is far from over. What we're talking about now is not that. To a certain extent, it's a matter of, can he stay in the immediate Newcastle picture long enough to make certain that the final part of his dream, going to the World Cup with England, comes true at the end of the season. And that's what's immediate for him. He wants a big finish to the season, a big second half to the season, and playing in the World Cup. And after that, it's Hollywood coming calling and saying, can we do a film of it if he achieves those two things?
Yeah, certainly so. And we'd love to see him in that World Cup squad, but it's not going to be on the back of recent games at left back. And I guess that's the other key question, John. And it's a very simple answer, really. If Dan Burn had remained playing left sided centre back, we wouldn't be having this conversation because if we are honest, he's been very, very good at centre back, and the games that he played before he was switched to left back, I don't think there were too many complaints, maybe one or two, but certainly nothing in which you would say time for you to leave the side, Dan. It's only since he's had to cover for Lewis Hall and Tina Livramento that the questions have really arisen. So there's a little bit of bad luck, I guess, that it's led to us to this kind of point.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when he was playing centre half at the beginning of the season, I thought he was outstanding. He played exceptionally well, as I've said many times. Playing in there where it's congested eliminates to a certain extent his lack of pace. Of course, he's going to get exposed for that, even at centre half. But the further you go wide, the more chance you're getting exposed. And a lot of wingers these days are so quick that when you play wide, the differentiate between the winger who's quick and the left back who's slow becomes enormous. And it's been tough for him having to play at left back because of Hall and Livramento going out. Yes, under normal circumstances, Trippier could have gone to left back. And Byrne could have stayed at centre half, but we were so far down on both sides of the pitch that it ended up with Dan playing left back, which he's done many times before at Brighton and certainly for Eddie. And Eddie's always willing to play him there because he still uses his height, etc., etc. But it's done him no favours. And I mean, regardless of what's just happened with his suspension coming up, because it's only for one game, but if he continued to play left back, if he was in the first team but continued to play left back for the rest of the season, forget what might happen to Newcastle United. I don't think Dan Burn would go to the World Cup. If he was playing left back in the Premier League for the rest of the season, he doesn't go to the World Cup. He's got to play centre half. If he goes out of the team because Hall's back now and he goes out of the team, which he must against Man City, and he doesn't get back in at left back, he's then got to fight Botman and try to break up the Howe and Botman partnership that everybody's waxing lyrical as the future of Newcastle. Though I must say, Sven Botman hasn't looked at his greatest in the last couple of games either. So there is a possibility of that situation for Dan because Howe looks immense. I mean, Howe looks what he is, absolute quality. Sven Botman has been a little bit exposed in the last couple of games. Dan Burn's been hugely exposed, playing out of position. But the situation for Dan Burn as he looks towards the World Cup, three things can happen to him. We can end up playing quite regularly at left back, which will be a disaster for his international career. He can sit on the bench as in the main understudy to Botman, which would be a disaster for his England situation. Or he can get back in for Botman or hope that Eddie plays three centre halves, because if he plays three centre halves, he is one of them with Botman and Howe the other one. So there's that answer to it as well. But it is not only is it a crucial period for Newcastle United now, and for various Newcastle players from Walter to whoever, it's a crucial time for Dan Burn.
Certainly is. He's made 165 appearances for Newcastle United. 80 of those have been at left back. So it shows you that Eddie Howe, of course, isn't afraid to use him in that position. Do you think we're at a point, or Dan Burn rather, is at a point where he has to be honest with himself, he has to be honest with Eddie Howe, and he has to knock on the manager's door and say, look, I want to play for this club. I want to start every single game, but you're doing me no favour starting me at left back. Lewis is back now, so I want to be seen as a centre back. Use me in times of emergency and what have you. But with his World Cup dream sort of flickering out in many ways since he's gone to left back, do you think Dan has to be honest and just lay it on the table and say,
to a certain extent. In some ways, he's almost too honest for his own good, because he is, because it's the club of his boyhood dreams, because he's a Geordie playing for Newcastle United and he's so grateful for that. I think he'd play in goal if he was asked by Eddie Howe to play in goal. And I think he would find it very difficult to knock on the manager's door and say, forget me as a left back, mate. He might, in a conversation he has with him, say, of course, my only real chance of doing well and going to the World Cup will be if I play as a centre half. But I think the manager's well aware of that. The extra problem we've got, of course, is how fit is Lewis Hall, and how fit will he be seen by the manager as capable of playing regularly at left back. And heaven forbid that Lewis Hall picks up an injury with England under 21s, because he's only started one Premier League game this season for us. He's going to have to start in place of Burn against Man City. And we just don't need that more complicated than it is at the moment. But yes, I mean, he isn't a left back. He makes as much of a good fist of as he can. But I think the last two games has proved that. And to be truthful, down at Brentford was a walking disaster for Dan, because he was booked early doors. If he's got to go 3/4 of the game with his lack of pace again at left back against a winger who flies, then he's in trouble, because it's a long time to go and avoid a second yellow booking. And I don't know about you, but I was yelling at the pitch when he was involved in the first penalty that was eventually chalked off. I was yelling at the pitch to say, Eddie, get him off, for goodness. And this has not been a big head afterwards. I was literally doing that at the time. And I think countless Geordies were, Andrew. He should have been subbed at that moment, because he was a yellow card waiting to happen. And what happened? He wasn't subbed. And within 10 minutes, the same player in the same position, in the same penalty area, goes down. Ironically, I thought the first one was more of a penalty than the second one, but that was something waiting to happen. What happens then? We bring on Hall too late. I think really Eddie got it massively wrong there. It did Burn no favours whatsoever. It certainly did Newcastle United no favours, because that was the confirmation that they were going to go on and lose it, because the penalty was scored and then we had the nonsense of the final goal. But it was tough for Dan Burn, but it was tough for Newcastle, and Eddie's going to have to really look long and hard, because there's a lot of players at the moment who have got to be looked at and say, what can we do? Voldemort is one, Burn is another, etc. Wingers are another. What happens with Elanga? What happens with Gordon when he's fit again? The fortnight is going to be taken up in an awful long way by Eddie, having to think out a lot of problems that he cannot put right on the training ground, because Burns not on the training ground, because Voldemort is not on the training ground. So it's very, very difficult. But hey, that's life, and that's what Eddie's paid for, and that's what Eddie's got to do. He's managed to find solutions throughout the 4 years he's been here. This is a major time to find solutions again, and Dan Burns one of them.
Or there's a solution to Dan Burn, isn't there? And that is Lewis Hall. But you're right about his fitness, because obviously Eddie Howe hasn't wanted to rush him back. That's totally understandable. I mean, the calls for Lewis Hall to start at left back in place of Dan Burn have been there a lot longer than the Brentford game, but Eddie's had to manage him, because it has been one of those injuries where if you do bring a player back too early, then he could well break down. And actually, probably in an ideal world, I'm not even sure that Eddie Howe would have wanted to be in the position where he has to play Lewis Hall against Man City. I think many people would probably agree that in Eddie's head, it still would have been Dan Burn. Now, that's been taken out of his hands, and for many people, that's a good thing, that it will be Lewis Hall, but there is the question over whether he's ready to play a full 90 minutes. But the Brentford game, John, so interesting, because we saw a lot of Dan Burn that we haven't really seen before. And I mentioned on the Monday show about his body language and his kind of personality wasn't there. He didn't look the same happy Dan Burn that we always see, the kind of chicky chappy. He looked like a man who had seen his fate before he even stepped out on the pitch, and he knew exactly what was coming. And then there was the moment when he's taken a long throw and he's getting a bit of grief off Brentford fans, and he bites at them. Like, how many times have you actually seen that happen from Dan Burn? But from any player, really, you don't really see it. And he took a little nibble and then he threw the ball straight out of play. And for me, that was a big sign that something wasn't right with Dan Burn on Sunday. And it's so sad that taking Dan Burn out of left back has happened in this manner. Wouldn't it have been nice if actually, Lewis Hall comes back in the side because he's competed in training and he's ready, and that's the reason, not simply because Dan Burn is being suspended because of his own mistakes and Eddie Howe's failure to take him off when he should have done.
Well, you mentioning all the things, the body language, etc., that didn't look right at Brentford. Isn't that, plus his yellow card, plus the penalty that wasn't, tells you he's screaming out. He was going to have to bring Hall on anyway. If he'd brought him on 10 minutes earlier, Burn wouldn't be suspended for the next game. Hall would have only had to spend another 10 minutes. He wouldn't have had to start against Manchester City Hall if Eddie didn't find that he was fit enough to. Now he hasn't got an option. And let's be right on Hall. If Hall's fully fit, Hall's a shoe-in at left back, the same as Livermento's a shoe-in at right back. I mean, we're not sort of suggesting that Hall isn't good enough to play left back, because by Jove he is. But we could have avoided this situation. I mean, if you could see what was wrong with Dan Burn, if I could see what was wrong with Dan Burn, I wish Eddie hadn't these rose tinted glasses on and couldn't see what was wrong with Burn, and it got him off after that penalty. And then we might have got something out of that game, even if it was a draw.
Now, there is a theory, John, and I don't subscribe to it, but a lot of people do, and a lot of our viewers and listeners will do, and I'm intrigued to get your point on it. And it's that Eddie Howe's too loyal to certain players, and one of those, probably at the top of the list that is often suggested, is Dan Burn. Do you think there's anything in that?
I think you can always make it stand up in bad times, because in bad times, like this is a bad time. It's no good pretending it isn't. This is a bad time. We're 2 points off relegation, for goodness sake. And you can't camouflage that just because we're still in the League Cup and we're in the Champions League and doing quite well. That doesn't justify what's happening in the Premier League. We're in a bad way, and we're travelling badly. In 2 of our next games in the Champions League are away from home. Let's see what happens then. Yes, you can easily say that, and he is very loyal, and I think he's loyal to the point where it's almost too much. Not only is he loyal in terms of team selection, but he's loyal in terms of perhaps keeping people after their sell-by date. I mean, he would have kept Callum Wilson for this season if Callum had been willing to stay, but Callum didn't want to stay and just be a sub again. It was best for everybody that he didn't stay, but he was prepared to keep him. Lascelles is still with us. In the past, players have gone very late on. They've been sold. So, and he did that with Miggy for a while, etc. He has got loyalty, is loyal in his makeup. Is that a bad thing or a good thing? The simple answer is on days when everything's wonderful, it's a wonderful trait to have, to be loyal to your players. And when it's times are bad, like now, it's one of the reasons times are bad. You're going to get a knee jerk at any situation. I think that he can be too loyal. I think that trait sometimes is taken just a little bit too far. I mean, there are punters that would say, and I'm not necessarily one of them, but would say, having spent the thick end of £100 million on Elanga and Ramsey, who are never starting or starting very little. I mean, I think Ramsey started 1 in the Premier League and Elanga started 4 in the Premier League, just in the Premier League. That, you ought to give them a choice, but you stick loyally with the people you already had. But, if you've spent 100 million, these guys should be able to play straight away. I'm not certain I go down that path, because I'm not certain these guys have justified being in the team as yet. in the way that Hall didn't go in the team, and Tonali, for obvious reasons, outside influences, and Gordon found it went in the team slowly. And these guys are going to go in the team slowly. But there are fans that saying to us, wait a minute, you've spent £100 million on two players and then you never start them, even though results are far from being good.
Yeah, I guess on the other side, Eddie Howe and some others might argue, well, actually, have they done too much to earn a start? But then you might say, well, how can they do anything if they're not getting the start to prove themselves?
Yeah.
If you guys have missed it, me and Sam Mulner spoke yesterday about the wingers, and we covered a bit about that with Alanga. I know, has he had enough games? Has he had a run of games to really prove himself? So go back and watch or listen to that if you haven't done already. As always, this episode is sponsored by NordVPN. Do click the link in the podcast description box to get a discount offer on your NordVPN plan. It's the perfect security while you're browsing public Wi-Fi, whether that be on the train, the bus, or in a restaurant or a cafe. If you're on public Wi-Fi, then this will keep you safe. You're supporting the podcast. Like I say, you're keeping yourself safe. So do hit the link in the podcast description box. I suppose, John, the other defense of this whole situation with Dan Burn is that Eddie Howe hasn't had any options really until Brentford Sunday gone. He's had to play Dan Burn there because of injuries to Tino, because of injuries to Lewis Hall, because Alex Murphy's not up to scratch, because there's no one else in the youth system. So as much as Sunday in itself was of Eddie Howe's making, he's been dealt a difficult hand, hasn't he? And he's had to play Dan Burn there, really.
Yeah, yes, but because as well, if you remember, we decided, and probably rightly so, that we would let Target go, and Target went off to Middlesbrough on loan, who could have played at left back. The only alternative we would have had for, saying you had to play Burn at left back, and we know that's what he would want. I mean, the theorists might say you could play Kraft right back and Trippier left back. And therefore, because they're both fullbacks, and therefore you're taking Dan out the firing line at left back. But I think he would always go down Dan because he likes Dan's height in the penalty area at both ends of the pitch, etc., etc. So I think he was always going to go down that route, yes. But that there's an alternative coming up rapidly now. There has to be against Man City, and that puts Hall back here. And when Hall is up to scratch, he's automatic left back, the same as Trippier isn't automatic right back, Livramento is, when they're both able to do it. And so Dan, this is a big rest of the season for Dan, because as far as his England career is concerned, this is his last hurrah. I mean, he's not going to make another big tournament in a couple of years' time with England. He's 33 now. And, if he can get the World Cup finals, he will have had the most wonderful career you can ever think of. With that added to what he's done at Newcastle, to winning the first trophy in 70 years, being instrumental in doing it with his goal, playing in the Champions League, and scored, if you remember, against Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League. It's been a wonderful career. The last hurrah and the last piece of the jigsaw he needs is to get to the World Cup with England. And that might be a little bit fluid at the moment. We know he's not an automatic starter at centre-half for England, but Thomas Tuchel likes him in there as the backup, the squad. But he's not, he's not going to stay there after the World Cup for any length of time. And, his career with Newcastle, as long as Eddie's manager, he'll probably be able to draw his old age pension at Newcastle, bless him, because Eddie will keep him and keep him and keep him and keep him. But he needs, and Dan's very competitive and very proud in what he will want to get into this team and finish in this team as a centre half. He's got the Botman situation. I tell you what, he's better off in some ways challenging Botman for a place, Andrew, than Shaw is challenging Chow for a place.
Yeah, well, I was just about to make this point. It's strange that we are actually having this conversation about Dan Burn, and that there's a strong possibility that actually I think he could oust Sven Botman as left-sided centre-back, because
Yes, he
we think
could.
back to how he did before he had to go to left-back. He did, he didn't do anything to memory that really stands out incorrect. Whereas Sven Botman, the last 2 games, he's been absolutely shocking. Like,
Yes, he
very,
has.
very just out of character for him. And I think there's a real possibility that in the next weeks and months coming up, that actually Dan Burn stands a much better chance of playing centre back than left back, but actually playing in a position which suits him. And alongside Malik Chow, that could be a really good partnership. And
Yeah.
that's down to Botman, not performing, because on ability, John, there's no question. It's it's Chow and it's Botman. But right now, if you're looking at Botman, you're thinking, something's not right there.
He's one
Either.
of many. He's one of many, mind Andrew, isn't he? You know, you
Well,
can look at Bruno and say, right. You can even look at Tonali, who's been terrific. And when I saw Tonali down there, I'm thinking, if I didn't know how quality you are, you're looking average, pal. There's a few of those. Gordon's been like that recently. There's a few that look. I mean, Chow's one of the exceptions who looks a quality player amongst a lot of dross at the moment, and that is the way it's been.
Certainly so. Obviously, Botman manages to step back up and find his form. Then I think many people will be backing only one man to win that race. But there's going to be options for rotation, and that's going to be another routine for Dan Burn, hopefully at centre back. Looking ahead to January, John, is a new left back a priority? Someone who can properly rival Lewis Hall, because otherwise it's going to be Lewis Hall, Dan Burn, Tino Livramento, and Kieran Trippier. Now, for some, Tino Livramento is a better left back than he is right back, but when we're looking at everyone fit and firing, it is Tino on the right and Hall on the left. But I think what Newcastle need now is a real competitor to Lewis Hall. And I mean, I looked at the Brentford game on Sunday, and they brought off the bench Rico Henry, who's not a world-class player, but what he is a very, very solid left back. And in my head, you want someone to compete with Lewis Hall, but it doesn't necessarily have to be someone who is better than Lewis Hall, if that makes sense. You want to improve the squad, and I think Rico Henry,
yes, it makes sense.
That person. So you're not spending too much money, you're not spending big wages, but you're bringing in someone who's a very good left back and can push Lewis Hall. Is a left back somewhere you think they should target in January?
Absolutely. I think this might sound quite ridiculous, but I think a left back and a centre forward sound quite ridiculous. I haven't signed Wissa and Wiltemade, but look at this. Look at the centre forward situation at the moment. All we've got is Wiltemade because Wissa and Asula are injured. There's talk that we'll sell Asula to Germany, and if we get 35 million, I think we probably would, as long as we had cover. And let's be truthful, Voldemort is not a centre forward anyway. So I think the two positions that stand out with alarm bells ringing for me, please do something in the next transfer window, is left back and centre forward.
Yeah, and simply because as well, we don't want to be heading into February where the main competitor for Lewis Hall is Dan Burn. Because then if Lewis Hall gets injured or suspended or is out of form, I mean, and this also applies to the next month, but he can't do anything about it until the window opens.
Correct.
But, he's going to have to turn to Dan Burn, and the chances of history repeating itself, i.e. the last 2 weeks, are very likely, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, no doubt the manager would say, well, if we can get Hall back and Livramento, and we've already got Trippier, we might be able to juggle both full-back positions because all of those can play on the left as well as the right. Well, Trips and Livramento, Hall's got to play left back. But yes, we need depth there. We need somebody there in an ideal world, and we need somebody at centre forward in an ideal world when we decide, and this isn't the programme for it, but when Eddie decides exactly what he's going to do with Voldemort, when he decides what position he's going to play in the team for the rest of his career, I mean. Because that is an intriguing one because he isn't a centre forward, and good for him for trying to play centre forward. But I mean, he plays centre forward on the halfway line, so there's a lot of answers for our friend Eddie to look at this fortnight, and to look at in the worst event because he hasn't got Voldemort and he hasn't got Byrne on the training ground to be able to work with them, and Hall, of course. All those are away, and they're the three big components in whatever he might decide to do tactically, and he can't work with them before Man City.
Yep, it's going to be interesting to see what he does. All eyes on that team sheet. Obviously, Lewis Hall will start against City, but it's then whether maybe a little tactical tweak to help out Voldemort. I did ask our viewers and listeners, John, to get in touch about Dan Byrne. I asked them whether he's now done at left back and does he have a chance to get back in. It's centre back, and I'll read you some of the replies, and then you can jump in once I'm done and pick on anything that I've said. We've got Raw Writer saying the problem is that he's an England international and contributes greatly to Tuchel's team ethic. Eddie Howe, as difficultly as it has been the case with others, is that he places great value on loyalty, often ignoring form. He's unlikely to compromise Byrne's England career. Tim says he's done at left back, but he was never a left back ever. He played left back even when Hall was fit. He's played left back recently as we have no option if Hall gets injured. Cover is needed and Byrne should be cover for centre back. James says he was done at left back seasons ago. I also wouldn't put him at left-sided centre back either. I know Botman has been shaky recently, but he's just a much better defender than Byrne. So for me, he's a backup at centre back. Jack says Botman is a better defender, especially when he's not having to cover for Byrne at left back. And if we play Byrne over him at centre back, we risk Botman leaving on a free. So in 18 months' time, we could have a 35-year-old Botman is our only left-sided centre back. I think that's a very interesting point there about Dan Byrne and Botman having to cover him. Thoughts on that one, John?
It's an interesting thought that you throw into the mix Botman's contract. And you know how enthusiastic Botman will be to sign a new contract if he's not automatically the left-sided centre half. And I've got a feeling that the word loyalty is sort of frowned upon these days, but I've got a feeling that Eddie's loyalty, he will, when he can, play Byrne left-sided centre half, because that's where he is with England, and Botman hasn't an international career on the line at the moment, although neither of those things ought to be of any consequence to Newcastle United. We've got to solve our problems to get us up the table, and the international sides look after themselves or don't.
Yeah, I would hope, and I do believe as well that Eddie will pick the team that is right for Newcastle United. And of course, you know, if we could secure Dan Byrne's place in the World Cup squad, each and every single one of us watching, listening, and who support Newcastle United would do, because as you say, John, it's the perfect ending to a career that he never thought he would have. But as you say, Eddie's got to pick the right team. And I do believe, though, that, you know, especially in the next few weeks and months, you know, if Dan Byrne applies himself right in training, there's a possibility that he will deservedly get a chance at left-sided centre-back. It's then whether he takes that, he can re-find that form that he's had there over the last, the few opportunities he's been playing at centre-back. And if he does, then no complaints. But if it goes badly and it goes wrongly and he's still playing, then you ask questions and you say, what is going on here? But I'm believing and have faith that Eddie will do what's right for the club and not necessarily right for Dan Byrne.
Interesting as well, Andrew, just something I thought of there, mate, to throw in when we're saying the rest of the season. We're talking purely about England level now. The rest of the season is important to Dan Byrne for his World Cup, etc., etc. Will not Tino Livramento and even Lewis Hall think they might sneak into the England squad for the World Cup if they get back in the Newcastle side, play regularly and play as well as they were playing? Either or both of them could get in the England squad yet.
Yeah, well, that left back position for England is up for grabs. You know, Lewis Skelly's not playing at Arsenal. He's been linked to several moves in January. Lewis Hall, if he can find his fitness and get back to the left back that was on show before he got injured, then there's no reason why he wouldn't be left back for England come the summer. So I'm looking forward to that. I think it all rests on that fitness of his and not having that injury that's kept him out reoccurring, which is always a risk. But fingers crossed that we are talking about the left back being Lewis Hall for Newcastle in England, and Dan Byrne at centre back, at least in the squad for England.
May I
Make a
say as well, sorry, Andrew, I do apologise. May I just say as well, as we're talking about England and Newcastle United, and we've mentioned Hall getting in, and we've mentioned Byrne getting in, Livramento is much more of an England player than either of them. In actual quality on the ball, etc. Tino Livramento is a Rolls Royce. He is, whether he's right back or left back, he just purrs, he just glides. Chow's a bit like him. They, as I say, I'm certain when they run over the mud, you wouldn't see any imprints in the mud, you know. They just glide over the top of it. I mean, he is a proper international player, Tino Livramento. Out of the three, if you were forgetting ability or the position or whatever, what is the identical picture of an England international? I think Tino leaps out as the one that is exactly that.
Yeah, I don't think many people would have too many arguments with that. Make a prediction then, John. What's going to happen for Dan Burn the rest of the season? Is he going to make it to the World Cup?
I think there's still a very good chance he will, because I think Thomas Tuchel is loyal as well. You know, when he brings people back in the fold, I mean, he brought Byrne in from nowhere, if you like. He went and brought Henderson in, who's then doing a job down at Brentford. And by the way, made some of our midfield players look very average. Our much vaunted midfield players, Henderson, who's on his old age pension, more or less bossed the midfield down there. So Tuchel is loyal. And I just feel like you, there's going to be opportunities for Byrne to play left-sided centre-back for Newcastle this season. And I tell you what, I hope he goes to the World Cup. And he's a Geordie, for goodness sake. He has done us proud. He has helped us win the Carabao Cup. He has scored in the Champions League against Paris Saint-Germain. He's had the heart the size of a frying pan that you've asked us to say many times in the past. And he deserves the final bit of the jigsaw. And the final bit is getting in the World Cup squad. Not necessarily the team, but the squad that goes there, because he would get minutes somehow or other. He deserves that because he's had a terrific career. Yes, we can get blinkered about him when we see him play left back. Yes, we can get blinkered about him when we see him getting done for space, for speed, and see those arms come out wanting to grab somebody in a bear hug because he knows he's lost him and the guy's going to get away. How often do we see that when he gets turned? Yes, we know all about that. But let's have the last bit of the fairy tale. And I wish him well. I hope he does go to the World Cup, because it would complete a wonderful, wonderful career for a guy that started in the way we all know he started. Well done, him.
I think he'll go. And I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't. I wouldn't be surprised if he starts a hell of a lot of games alongside Malik Chow, if I'm being honest. I've just got a little bit of a concern about Botman. He suffered a big injury. And then obviously the other knee went as well. And I'm just a little bit wary of that. So it wouldn't surprise me. You throw in Eddie Howe's clear liking of Byrne and his attitude and his work ethic. You know, I think there's a good chance that he finishes the season as first choice centre back alongside Chow, does very well, and heads to the World Cup in what would be, as we say, the perfect ending for his football career. Let us know in the comments your thoughts on Big Dan Byrne. What does the future hold for him at Newcastle United, and will he get into that England squad for the World Cup? Thank you very much for tuning in. Do it thumbs up, do it subscribe on the YouTube channel, do leave us a rating and review on your audio platform. And from me and John, we'll see you guys next week.